I'm Cheryl, 32 female. I live in a small but cozy apartment in a city a few hours away from my hometown, a place I left for college and never really returned to. I work as an archivist for the city's historical society, a job that suits my quiet nature and love for piecing together the past. For most of my life, I felt like a footnote in my own family's history, but I never imagined they would one day try to erase me from it completely. This is the story of how my family made me a ghost at their most important celebration, and how I finally learned to haunt the life they tried to build without me. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My family has always operated like a well-oiled machine, one designed and maintained by my mother, Brenda. A former interior designer, she didn't just decorate homes, she curated lives. Everything had to look perfect, from the coordinated holiday outfits to the career paths of her children. My father, George, a respected civil engineer, was the solid, quiet foundation upon which my mother built her masterpiece of a family. He was a good man, I thought, but one who long ago ceded all domestic and social power to his wife. The centerpieces of their creation were my older siblings, David and Laura. David, the venture capitalist, was all sharp suits and confident investments, his success a constant topic of conversation. Laura, a PR executive, was beautiful, charming, and married to an equally impressive surgeon. They were the stars of the show. And then there was me. I wasn't a failure, not by any objective measure. I had a degree, a stable career I enjoyed, and a life I had built for myself. But in the grand design of my mother's family, I was a mismatched piece of furniture. I was the quiet one who preferred books to parties, the one who chose history over finance or law, the one who was still single at 32. I was a loose thread in my mother's perfect tapestry, and she had a habit of either tucking me away or ignoring me altogether. Our relationship was one of polite distance. She'd call me every few weeks, the conversations always feeling like a checklist. How is work? Are you eating well? Are you seeing anyone? The questions were rote, her interest superficial. She never asked about the specifics of my job, the historical documents I was preserving, or the little joys in my life. The calls were for her, to confirm she had fulfilled her maternal duty for the week. The silence began subtly. The usual bi-weekly call from my mother was a week late. When I called her, she sounded distracted, her voice tinny and rushed. "Oh, Cheryl, hi, is everything all right? I'm just in the middle of something." I asked what she was up to, and she vaguely mentioned planning something for the garden club. It felt off, but I let it go. My sister, Laura, who usually sent me memes or work complaints, was also quiet. A text I sent her about a funny article I'd read went unanswered for 3 days, before she replied with a single, "Haha, crazy." My brother, David, was never a big communicator, so his silence wasn't unusual, but the combined radio silence from the rest of the family started to feel heavy. I tried to brush it off. They were busy people with important lives. My life, in comparison, was small and predictable. I spent my days in the climate-controlled quiet of the city archives, handling centuries-old letters and photographs. My job was to find the stories in the silence, to piece together narratives from forgotten fragments. It was ironic that I was now struggling to decipher the silence in my own family. A week turned into 2. The anxiety began to coil in my stomach. I called my dad, thinking he would be the straightforward one. "Hey, Dad, just checking in. Haven't heard from Mom in a bit." His voice was hearty, almost too hearty. "Everything's great, Cheryl. Just busy, you know how your mother gets. Lots of projects on the go." He changed the subject quickly, asking about my work in a way that made it clear he wasn't really listening to the answer. The conversation felt managed, as if he were navigating a minefield. That's when I started to feel the cold dread of exclusion, a feeling I knew all too well from my childhood. It was the feeling of being the last one picked for a team, of sitting alone at a crowded lunch table, of hearing my siblings whispering about a secret I wasn't privy to. My mother had a way of punishing perceived slights with silence, of icing someone out until they crawled back, apologizing for an offense they didn't even understand. But I couldn't think of anything I had done. Our last conversation had been brief and unremarkable. The last time I'd seen them was months ago at a perfectly pleasant, if sterile, family dinner. I had been on my best behavior, asking all the HT questions about their lives, and offering little about my own to avoid scrutiny. The date of my parents' 40th wedding anniversary was approaching. It was a huge milestone, and I had been expecting to hear about some kind of celebration. Months earlier, I had even asked Laura about it. "I'm sure Mom will do something," she'd said dismissively. "You know how she is, it'll be big." I had a gift ready, a custom-bound book I'd made with restored photos from their early years together, each one paired with historical newspaper clippings from their wedding date. It was a thoughtful, personal gift, the kind of thing an archivist would come up with. I was proud of it. But as the date loomed closer with no word, no invitation, no phone call, the book sat on my coffee table like a monument to my own foolishness. Maybe they were just doing something small, I told myself. Maybe just the four of them. The thought stung, but it was a familiar pain, one I had learned to compartmentalize. I convinced myself that was the reason. It was easier than confronting the alternative, that they were having a party, a big one, and had simply decided not to include me. The silence was no longer just unsettling. It was a deliberate, deafening roar, and I was standing right in the middle of it, completely alone. The day of my parents' 40th anniversary arrived with a crushing sense of normalcy. The sun rose, I went to work, and the world kept spinning as if it weren't the day my own family was treating me like I didn't exist. I had decided to call them, to break the silence myself. I would wish them a happy anniversary and pretend I didn't notice the gaping hole where an invitation should have been. It was a strategy of self-preservation, a way to maintain the fragile peace that I had always been responsible for upholding. I called my mother's cell phone around midday. It went straight to voicemail, her cheerful, recorded voice a cruel parody of the warmth she rarely showed me in person. I tried my father's phone. Same result. I left a message for both of them. "Hi, Mom and Dad, just calling to wish you a very, very happy 40th anniversary. It's such an amazing milestone. I love you both." My voice was steady, but my hand was shaking. The words felt hollow, launched into a void. The rest of the day was a study in distraction. I buried myself in a new collection at the archives, the personal letters of a 19th century woman who had been ostracized by her family for marrying a poor merchant. I felt a strange kinship with her, a woman dead for over 100 years. Her spidery script spoke of a profound loneliness, a longing for connection that was met with cold indifference. She wrote of seeing her siblings in town and having them look right through her. I knew that feeling. I had felt it across a dinner table, over the phone, and now, in this crushing silence. That evening, I ordered takeout and tried to watch a movie, but my eyes kept drifting to my phone, willing it to light up with a text or a call. Nothing. By 10 p.m., I had accepted it. They weren't going to call me back. They were busy celebrating their perfect life, a life in which I was apparently an inconvenient truth. The gift I had so carefully made sat on my table, its beautiful leather cover seeming to mock me. I pushed it to the side, my throat tight with unshed tears. I refused to cry. Crying felt like giving them a victory I wasn't even sure they were trying to win. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe there was a simple explanation. I clung to that sliver of hope like a life raft. The next morning, the illusion shattered. I was scrolling through social media, a mindless habit to start my day, when a picture stopped me cold. It was posted by my cousin, one of David's kids. The photo was of a large, joyful group of people, all dressed in beautiful evening wear, raising champagne glasses and a toast. The setting was a lavishly decorated hall I didn't recognize. In the center of the photo stood my parents, Brenda and George, beaming. My mother was wearing a stunning silver gown, my father a sharp tuxedo. They were surrounded by family. My brother David and his perfect family were there. My sister Laura and her husband were there. All my aunts, uncles, and cousins were there. Everyone. Every single member of our sprawling extended family was in that photo, smiling for the camera. Everyone except me. I felt the air leave my lungs. My vision swam, and for a second I thought I was going to be sick. It wasn't a small dinner. It wasn't just the four of them. It was a massive, elegant, catered affair. A party. a huge 40th anniversary party, and I hadn't been invited. I clicked on the photo, my fingers trembling, and scrolled through the comments. Such a beautiful celebration. Congratulations, Brenda and George. What a wonderful night for a wonderful family. The word family felt like a punch to the gut. I was their daughter. How could I not be a part of that family? I went to my Stir's page. There it was, a whole album of photos. Laura and Mom, arms linked, smiling, David giving a speech at a podium, my father dancing with my mother, looking happier than I had ever seen him. Photo after photo of a joyous family event, and in each one there was a Cheryl-shaped hole. I was a ghost. I was watching my own family celebrate a milestone as if I had never been born. The pain was physical, a cold, heavy weight settling in my chest. It wasn't just that I had missed a party, it was the public declaration of my irrelevance. Every person in those photos knew I wasn't there. Did they ask where I was? Did my parents offer some lie? Or worse, did no one even notice my absence? I immediately called my mother, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. This time, she answered. Her voice was groggy, as if she'd just woken up. "Cheryl, what's wrong?" she asked, a note of irritation in her voice. "The party," I said, my own voice a hoarse whisper. "I saw the pictures. You had a party." There was a pause. For a split second, I heard a flicker of panic in her silence before the smooth, practiced composure clicked back into place. "Oh my goodness," she said, her tone shifting to one of dramatic, theatrical shock. "Oh, Cheryl, honey, the invitation. It must have gotten lost in the mail. With all the planning, I must have forgotten to check if you received it. I am so sorry." The excuse was so flimsy, so insulting, it was almost laughable. In the age of email, text messages, and phone calls, a lost paper invitation was the best she could come up with. "You forgot?" I asked, disbelief warring with a lifetime of conditioned deference. "You, Dad, Laura, David, all of you forgot I existed." "Don't be so dramatic," she snapped, her voice losing its feigned sweetness. It was a simple, regrettable oversight, an honest mistake. We were all so busy, and things just fell through the cracks. We missed you, of course. We missed you, of course. The words were empty, a cheap bandage on a gaping wound, an oversight, a mistake. My presence in my own family was something that could fall through the cracks. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just said, "Okay, Mom," and hung up the phone. The lie was more painful than the exclusion itself. It told me that she didn't even respect me enough to invent a believable excuse. I was an afterthought, and my feelings were a minor inconvenience to be managed with a lazy, transparent lie. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, the ghost at a feast I never knew was happening. For the next few days, I was numb. I went to work and moved through my routines like an automaton. The lie my mother had told echoed in my head, a simple, regrettable oversight. I almost started to believe it, or at least I tried to. Believing the lie was less painful than confronting the truth. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being too dramatic. It was a familiar gaslighting routine, one she had perfected over decades. Whenever I had expressed hurt over being excluded or ignored as a child, I was labeled too sensitive or too dramatic. It was a brilliant tactic. It made me question my own reality and ultimately taught me to swallow my feelings to keep the peace. My siblings played their parts perfectly. Laura sent me a text. "Mom told me about the invitation mix-up. So sorry you missed it. It was a fun night. We should catch up soon." David didn't bother to contact me at all. It was a united front of casual dismissal. They were all in on it, painting me as the overly emotional outlier who couldn't take a simple mistake in stride. I tried to let it go. I deleted the photos from my mind, focused on my work, and attempted to rebuild the fragile walls around my heart. But something had broken this time. This wasn't a forgotten invitation to a weekend barbecue. This was a 40th anniversary celebration. It was a legacy event, documented and shared for the world to see. It was a statement. The numbness began to fade, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. It was the kind of anger that doesn't explode but rather clarifies, bringing everything into sharp, painful focus. For my entire life, I had been trying to earn my place in a family that had already decided I didn't have one. I had contorted myself into smaller, quieter, more agreeable versions of myself to make them comfortable, and in return, they had erased me. The turning point came a week after the party. I received a text from a number I didn't immediately recognize. It just said, "Cheryl, it's your Aunt Susan. I have something I think you need to see. I am so sorry." My Aunt Susan was my father's younger sister. She was a nurse, a kind, no-nonsense woman who had always treated me with a warmth that was absent from my immediate family. We weren't close, mainly because my mother kept her husband's family at a polite distance. But Susan had always made a point to seek me out at the rare family gatherings I did attend, asking me real questions about my life and listening to the answers. A moment later, a video file appeared in our chat. My heart pounded as I pressed play. The video was clearly shot on a phone, slightly shaky, and filled with the ambient noise of a party, clinking glasses, laughter, and music. The camera panned across the room, showing the happy, celebrating faces of my relatives. Then it focused on the stage where my mother, Brenda, stood at a podium, champagne flute in hand. She looked radiant, every inch the proud matriarch. My father stood beside her, beaming. "I just want to thank you all for coming," my mother began, her voice ringing with emotion. 40 years with this wonderful man." She paused for applause. "We have built such a beautiful life together, a beautiful home, and a beautiful family." She raised her glass higher. "And I have to thank my two perfect children, David and Laura." My breath caught in my throat. "Two." She said two. It wasn't a slip of the tongue, it was deliberate. "They have given us everything a parent could hope for," she continued, her voice thick with pride. "Success, happiness, beautiful grandchildren. They and their wonderful spouses are the joy of our lives. They have made our family complete." She looked directly at David and Laura, who were standing near the front, glowing under her praise. "So let's raise a glass, to David and Laura, our perfect children, and to the legacy we have all built together." The crowd roared its approval. "To David and Laura," someone shouted. Glasses clinked. The camera lingered on my mother's smiling face for a moment before the video ended. I watched it again, and a third time. Each viewing felt like a fresh stab to the heart. My two perfect children. They have made our family complete. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't a lost invitation. This was a deliberate, calculated erasure. In that moment, in front of our entire extended family, my mother had publicly disowned me. She had stood on a stage and declared to the world that she only had two children. I was not just forgotten, I was negated. I finally understood. I wasn't the mismatched piece of furniture. I was the flaw in the design, the crack in the facade. And to maintain the illusion of perfection, my mother had decided to plaster over me, to pretend I was never there. The pain was immense, a tidal wave of a lifetime of slights and dismissals crashing down on me at once. But underneath the pain, something else was stirring. The simmering anger had found its fuel. It was no longer a vague, directionless feeling. It was a cold, hard, diamond-sharp certainty. The numbness was gone. The hurt was still there, but it was now secondary to a new, powerful resolve. They thought I was a ghost? Fine. It was time to show them what a ghost could do. My life as the quiet, accommodating daughter was over. The archivist in me, the part of me that meticulously uncovers hidden truths, was now in control. My family had created a fiction, a carefully curated history of their perfect lives. I decided it was time to provide a few missing documents. The video from Aunt Susan was the key, the Rosetta Stone that translated a lifetime of confusing signals into a single, ugly language of rejection. With this new clarity, I began to look back not with the blurry filter of hope and familial obligation, but with the sharp, analytical eye of an archivist. My job was to sift through records, find patterns, and construct a narrative from evidence. I decided to apply the same methodology to my own life. I started with my childhood. My parents, particularly my mother, had always framed our family as a unit, but the memories that surfaced told a different story. I remembered school plays I had been in where my parents hadn't shown up, citing a last-minute work emergency for my dad or a conflicting social event for my mom, while they never missed a single one of David's football games or Laura's dance recitals. I recalled family vacations where David and Laura would get new ski equipment or fancy dinner outfits. And I would be told that my old gear was perfectly fine, or that my simple clothes were more my style. These weren't isolated incidents, they were a pattern. David was the heir, the one who would carry the family's ambition forward. Laura was the princess, the social asset who would marry well and reflect my mother's grace. I was other. I was the quiet, bookish child who didn't fit into the glossy magazine spread my mother was trying to create. My interests were deemed solitary and strange. My desire to work in a library or museum was met with a polite but firm, "Well, it's not very ambitious, is it, dear? But if it makes you happy." Her feigned support was a form of dismissal, framing my passions as quaint, unserious hobbies rather than a legitimate career path. The cruelty wasn't in overt abuse, but in the subtle, pervasive devaluing of my existence. It was in the family photos where I was always on the edge of the frame. It was in the conversations that always revolved around my siblings' achievements, with my own life treated as a brief, uninteresting footnote. My investigation moved from memory to digital footprints. I became a forensic historian of my own family. I went through years of my mother's and sister's social media accounts. The pattern was glaringly obvious once I knew what to look for. There were countless posts celebrating family time or a perfect family weekend from trips I was never invited on. A ski trip to Aspen, a weekend at a vineyard, a celebratory brunch for Laura's promotion. For years, I had seen these posts and felt a familiar pang of exclusion, but I had always accepted their excuses. "Oh, it was a last-minute thing, Cheryl," or "it was more of a couple's trip, you would have been bored." Now, seeing them all laid out, I recognized the methodical, consistent pattern of my exclusion. I was being systematically edited out of the family narrative in real time. Then I started digging into something more tangible: finances. It was a long shot, but my father, the meticulous financial advisor, had always lectured us about responsible planning. When I turned 25, he had helped each of us set up investment portfolios. He managed them, sending us annual statements. David and Laura often talked about how well their investments were doing, mentioning my father's magic touch. My own portfolio had grown, but modestly. I had always assumed it was because I had started with less seed money. Out of a gut feeling, I decided to move my portfolio to a new, independent advisor. To do that, I needed a complete history of the account, something my father had always handled. I called him, feigning a desire to be more proactive with my finances. He sounded hesitant, even slightly panicked, but couldn't reasonably refuse without raising suspicion. When the documents arrived a week later, I spent an entire weekend cross-referencing years of statements. What I found made my blood run cold. My father had not been managing our accounts equally. While my brother and sister's portfolios were filled with high-growth, aggressive stocks that had paid off handsomely, mine was almost entirely in low-yield, conservative bonds. That wasn't the worst of it. I discovered several large withdrawals from my account over the years, authorized by him as the account manager. The dates of these withdrawals were chillingly precise. One matched the down payment on David's first luxury condo. Another aligned perfectly with the lavish destination wedding Laura had in Mexico. My father, the man I thought was at least passively kind, had been systematically siphoning money from my future to fund the lifestyles of his perfect children. He was literally taking from me to give to them. This wasn't just emotional neglect, this was a calculated financial betrayal. The foundation he had supposedly built was a sham, at least for me. He hadn't just allowed my mother to push me aside, he had actively participated, using his professional skills to disadvantage me while elevating my siblings. This discovery was the final piece of the puzzle. The anniversary party wasn't a one-time event. The toast wasn't just a poor choice of words. It was the culmination of a decades-long project to minimize my existence and reallocate my resources, emotional, social, and financial, to the children they actually valued. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had been actively profiting from my absence. The quiet sadness I had felt for so long was burned away by a white-hot rage. I had the evidence. I had the memories, the digital trail, and now the financial records. The archivist had completed her research. The story was clear, ugly, and undeniable. My family hadn't just curated a perfect image, they had built it on a foundation of lies, theft, and my own erasure. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was not going to let them get away with it. The silence they had imposed on me for years was about to be broken, and the sound would bring their carefully constructed world crashing down. For a week, I sat with the evidence. The financial statements were spread across my dining room table, a damning mosaic of my father's betrayal. The video of my mother's toast was saved to my desktop, a constant, sickening reminder of her words. The rage didn't subside. Instead, it coalesced into a plan. It was methodical, quiet, and precise, just like my work. My first instinct had been to scream, to confront them in a storm of fury, but I knew that would be playing their game. They would paint me as hysterical, dramatic Cheryl having another episode. My anger would be used as evidence of my instability, and the real issue, their calculated cruelty, would be buried under accusations about my tone. No, a confrontation had to be on my terms, in a setting I controlled, where the evidence could not be dismissed or shouted down. My plan had two phases. The first was securing my own foundation. The second was demolishing theirs. Phase 1 began with a call to my new financial advisor. I explained the situation calmly and factually, pointing out the unauthorized withdrawals and the gross mismanagement of my portfolio compared to my siblings. He was appalled. He confirmed that what my father had done was not just unethical, but likely illegal, a severe breach of fiduciary duty. We immediately began the process of transferring all my assets to a new firm, one that had no connection to my father. We also initiated a formal complaint against him with the Financial Regulatory Authority, backed by the years of damning evidence. This wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen from me. Next, I reached out to Aunt Susan. I called her and thanked her for the video. "I knew you deserved to know the truth," she said, her voice heavy with sadness. "I've watched my brother let Brenda run this ridiculous perfection contest for years, and I've had enough. What they did to you was cruel." I told her about the financial betrayal. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "That's monstrous, Cheryl. I'm so sorry." Her validation was like a balm on a raw wound. I asked if she would stand with me, not to fight, but to be a witness. She agreed without hesitation. Her presence would be crucial. She was the one person in the family whose integrity was unimpeachable. Phase 2 was about crafting the confrontation. I decided the perfect venue would be a family event, a stage of their own making. Thanksgiving was just a few weeks away. It was my mother's favorite holiday, another opportunity to stage her perfect family tableau for all to see. It was always held at their house, a sprawling, immaculately decorated monument to their success. I knew they wouldn't invite me. They would assume I was still sulking about the invitation mix-up. So, I invited myself. A week before the holiday, I sent a group email to my parents, David and Laura. The subject line was "Looking forward to Thanksgiving." The email was breezy and cheerful. "Hi, everyone. I know things have been a bit distant lately, and I'm sure I overreacted about the party mix-up. It was a silly misunderstanding. Family is too important to let things like that get in the way. I've already booked my train ticket and can't wait to see you all for Thanksgiving." The calculated cheerfulness was a Trojan horse. It disarmed them completely. My mother called me almost immediately, her voice dripping with saccharine relief. "Oh, Cheryl, I'm so glad you're being so mature about this. Of course, we would love to have you. We were just so worried you were still upset." She was buying it. They all were. They thought I was crawling back, just like I always had. They thought I had accepted my place and was ready to resume my role as the quiet, accommodating footnote. In their arrogance, they couldn't conceive of any other possibility. They were so confident in their control over the family narrative that they couldn't see the threat right in front of them. The final piece of my plan involved the gift I had made for their anniversary, the beautifully bound book of photos and memories. It was still sitting on my coffee table. I opened it and began to make some new additions. At the back of the book, I carefully inserted several new pages. These pages contained no happy memories. Instead, I printed and mounted crisp, clear copies of the key evidence. There were screenshots of my mother's two perfect children toast. There were copies of the financial statements, with the withdrawals highlighted in bright red. There was a timeline I had created, linking the money taken from my account to my siblings' major life purchases. I turned the book from a tribute into an indictment, a detailed archive of their betrayal. The truth was now a weapon, and I had loaded it, polished it, and was ready to deploy it. As I packed my bag for the trip home, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't the scared, overlooked child anymore. I was an archivist, and I was about to present my findings. I arrived at my parents' house on Thanksgiving morning feeling unnervingly calm. The house was, as always, perfect. A scent of roasting turkey and cinnamon hung in the air, a manufactured aroma of familial warmth. My mother greeted me at the door with a hug that was all performance, her hands patting my back with the same detached air she might use to adjust a picture frame. "Cheryl, we're so happy you came," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. My father hovered behind her, looking relieved and slightly guilty. He gave me a quick, awkward hug and mumbled, "Good to see you, kiddo." Laura and David were already there with their families, filling the house with noise and laughter. They treated me with a sort of magnanimous pity, as if they were the gracious monarchs welcoming a wayward courtier back into the fold. "Glad you could make it, Cher," David said, clapping me on the shoulder before turning back to a conversation about the stock market. Laura gave me an air kiss and said, "That sweater is cute." The condescension was so thick I could taste it. They had no idea what was coming. They saw the same old Cheryl, the one who would absorb their slights and fade into the background. I played my part. I complimented the decorations. I asked my siblings about their jobs. I played with my nieces and nephews. I was a ghost in the machine, moving through the motions of a family gathering I no longer belonged to. I had brought two things with me, a bottle of expensive wine as a host gift and the leather-bound book, which I kept in my bag. The morning crawled by in a haze of small talk and feigned interest. My Aunt Susan arrived around noon. She caught my eye across the crowded living room and gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. Her presence was a silent anchor in a sea of hypocrisy. Dinner was served at 2. We all gathered around the enormous dining table, a scene straight out of a magazine. My father stood at the head of the table to carve the turkey. Before he started, my mother tapped her glass with a knife. "I'd just like to say something," she announced, beaming at the captive audience. "I'm so thankful to have my whole family here today, all of us together. It's what matters most." The irony was so thick, I nearly choked. She looked right at me and smiled, a smile that said, "See. Everything is fine now that you're behaving." That was my cue. "I actually have something I'd like to say, too," I said, my voice clear and steady. A few heads turned in my direction, surprised. I was never one for speeches. "In fact, I have a late anniversary gift for Mom and Dad." I stood up and retrieved the book from my bag. I walked to the head of the table and placed it in front of my mother. "I made this for your 40th, I said. "A collection of memories." Brenda's face lit up with a self-satisfied smile. "Oh, Cheryl, how thoughtful," she gushed, opening the book. She and my father leaned in to look. They slowly turned the first few pages, filled with the old black-and-white photos of their youth. They murmured their appreciation. My siblings looked on, bored but polite. "Keep going," I said softly. I added some more recent memories at the end. They turned the page, and the mood shattered. The first thing they saw was a high-resolution still from the video of my mother's toast, the caption beneath it reading, "To my two perfect children." My mother's smile vanished. My father's face went pale. "What is this?" Brenda whispered, her voice sharp. "It's from the party I wasn't invited to," I said, my voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. "The one where you toasted your two perfect children and declared your family complete." A confused murmur went around the table. David and Laura exchanged a panicked look. My mother frantically tried to close the book, but I placed my hand on it, holding it open. "Turn the page," I commanded. My father, looking dazed, did. The next pages were the financial statements, the highlighted withdrawals, the timeline connecting the stolen money to David's condo and Laura's wedding. "And this," I said, my voice ringing with cold fury, "is how Dad helped you complete your perfect family." By stealing from your third child's future to fund the lives of the ones you actually value. The room fell into a dead silence, broken only by my Aunt Susan's quiet gasp. Everyone was staring at the book, then at my parents, then at me. "This is a misunderstanding," my father stammered, his hands shaking. "Cheryl, this isn't the time or the place." "This is the perfect time and the perfect place," I cut him off. "For 32 years, you have made me feel invisible. You excluded me, ignored me, and belittled me. But this," I said, tapping the financial records, "this is not just cruel, this is theft. You used your position as my financial advisor to defraud me." Laura was the first to speak. "This is insane. Mom, Dad, she's making this up." "Am I?" I turned to her. "Or did you ever wonder why your wedding in Mexico was so affordable? Did you ever ask where the down payment for David's first property came from?" David shot to his feet. "You have no right to come in here and make these wild accusations." "They aren't accusations, David. They're facts. And a copy of this little book has already been sent to the financial regulatory authorities. They seemed very interested in Dad's management practices." My father looked like he was going to collapse. He sank into his chair, speechless. My mother, however, was made of harder stuff. Her face, which had been pale with shock, was now flushed with rage. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "After everything we've done for you, you pull a stunt like this. You were always a difficult, ungrateful child." "Ungrateful?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Ungrateful for what? For being sidelined my entire life? For being a dirty secret you had to hide to maintain your perfect image? You didn't forget to invite me to the party. You disowned me in that speech. You just didn't have the courage to say it to my face." I looked around at my extended family, who were all watching in stunned silence. "I want you all to know," I said, my voice steady, "that the family you see here is a lie. It's a performance, curated by a woman who values appearances more than her own child, and funded by a man who betrayed her trust. I'm done being your ghost. I'm done being your footnote." I turned my back on them, on the perfect turkey growing cold on the table, on the wreckage of their perfect lives. I walked over to my Aunt Susan. "Thank you," I whispered. She squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm proud of you," she whispered back. I didn't look back as I walked out the front door. I didn't need to. I had said everything I needed to say. The silence had been broken. The truth had been archived, documented, and presented. The final family gathering was over, and for the first time in my life, I felt free. The days following that Thanksgiving dinner were strangely quiet, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of exclusion, but the clean, empty silence of a space that has been cleared of clutter. I didn't hear from my parents or my siblings. I hadn't expected to. The lines of communication had been definitively severed, not by a misunderstanding, but by the clean, sharp blade of truth. I blocked their numbers, not out of anger, but out of a need for peace. I had spent my entire life waiting for a call from them, for a crumb of attention or approval. Now, the silence from their end was a gift. The first official notification came about 2 weeks later. It was a letter from the Financial Regulatory Board, confirming that they were launching a full investigation into my father's professional conduct. His career as a trusted financial advisor was, for all intents and purposes, over. I didn't feel a sense of triumphant joy, but a grim, sober satisfaction. It wasn't about punishing him, it was about consequences. He had built his reputation on integrity and trust, all while systematically betraying mine. The foundation he had built for his perfect family was now cracking under the weight of his own actions. The social fallout was just as significant. Aunt Susan kept me updated in carefully spaced, respectful calls. The story of the Thanksgiving confrontation had ripped through the extended family. There were 2 camps. One, led by my mother's side of the family, staunchly defended my parents, painting me as a vindictive, troubled daughter who had fabricated a malicious story to ruin a holiday. The other side, mostly my father's relatives who had long been wary of my mother's social climbing, were horrified. They had seen the look on my father's face when he saw the documents. They believed me. Families took sides, old tensions flared, and my mother's perfectly curated social world began to crumble. She was no longer the respected matriarch, but the subject of gossip and speculation. The perfect family portrait she had spent a lifetime creating was now fractured beyond repair. I focused on my own life with a clarity I had never had before. The energy I had once spent trying to understand my family, trying to please them, trying to win their love, was now mine to invest in myself. I poured myself into my work at the archives, finding a deep, grounding satisfaction in preserving the stories of others. I started a project I had long dreamed of, digitizing the city's oldest photographic negatives, making them accessible to the public. It was meaningful work, connecting the past to the present, giving voice to those who had been forgotten. My new financial advisor helped me set up a sound, transparent investment plan. We discovered the full extent of my father's mismanagement was even worse than I initially thought. The legal proceedings were slow and emotionally draining, but I pursued them with a quiet determination. It was my money, my future, and I was reclaiming it. A settlement was eventually reached, with my father agreeing to pay back the full amount he had siphoned, plus damages, to avoid more public and criminal charges. It was a significant sum, and it forced my parents to sell the large, immaculate house where I had grown up feeling like a guest. The symbol of their perfect life was gone, sold to pay for their decades of deceit. One of the most surprising and healing parts of the aftermath was my renewed relationship with Aunt Susan. We started talking regularly, first on the phone, then with weekend visits. I got to know her and my uncle, and through them, I reconnected with the side of the family that had been kept at arm's length. By my mother. They were kind, normal, down-to-earth people. They were interested in my life, they celebrated my successes, and they offered support without judgment. I spent Christmas with them that year. It wasn't a lavish, performative affair like my mother's holidays. It was warm, chaotic, and filled with genuine laughter. Sitting in my aunt's cozy living room, surrounded by people who saw me and valued me for who I was, I realized I hadn't lost a family. I had escaped a toxic dynamic and found a real one waiting for me. I never saw my parents, David, or Laura again. I heard through the grapevine that my brother's venture capital firm restructured him out of his partnership after the scandal with my father became a liability. Laura's perfect marriage apparently wasn't strong enough to withstand public disgrace, and she and her husband separated. My parents moved to a smaller condo in a different state, seeking anonymity. Their perfect world had imploded, not because of what I did, but because it was built on a foundation of lies that could not hold. Today, my life is quiet, but it is my own. I have a job I love, a small circle of true friends, and a family that chooses to be in my life. The ghost they tried to make me is gone. In her place is a woman who knows her own worth. I am an archivist of my own story now, and I've learned that the most important part of history is not just preserving the records, but having the courage to read them for what they truly are. My future is an empty book, and for the first time, I am the only one holding the pen. And I am designing a story that is beautiful, honest, and completely mine.